Hey gang, back with another video for you today, and Father's Day is around the corner, and even though I've done a top 20 classy fragrances for dads or any men to wear video from a few weeks ago, I thought I'd put together another video of my top 5 fragrances my father wore. So these are 5 fragrances that I was influenced by my dad wearing, and they've left a major impression on me with these fragrances and my appreciation for fragrances, cologne, and perfumes. So today, in this Sauvage review video, if you want to find out what my top 5 fragrances my father wore are, then please stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Sebastian with Smelling Great Fragrance Reviews. That's right, today I'm talking about the top 5 fragrances my father wore in this video. And these are classic fragrances. I have been Instagramming here and there. If you're following me on Instagram, you probably saw photos of some of these fragrances. And I've been trying to acquire some of the classics because, you know, scent memories are always there, and especially with the bottles as well. These fragrances, when I look at them, they always bring back memories of my dad. And since he's gone and I don't have a father to celebrate Father's Day with, I thought this video would be a great dedication for him. But before we tell you the 5 fragrances, if this is your first time tuning into my channel and you still haven't subscribed today, please click the subscribe button below and also click the bell so you'll be notified for future videos and giveaways. These fragrances were not sent to me. I purchased them myself. As you know, I'm a collector and I love my classic fragrances. I've been wearing fragrances since the 70s, although not really wearing them, sneaking sprays from my mom and my dad, and really love the ones my dad wore. I'm a very visual person, and some of these fragrances and their bottles obviously mean a lot to me. So we're going to start off with number 5, and the first one we're going to talk about today is this classic from 1978 created by Carlos Benaim. Can you guess which it is? It's Polo by Ralph Lauren, this one right here. So recently I picked this one up because it just reminded me of my dad, because he started wearing this probably around 1980 or 1981. We had just arrived in the USA in 1980 from Lebanon, where I lived, and growing up in this family of perfume appreciators, he wore a lot. He wore a lot of fragrances. We'll get to a few in the 70s when I remember him wearing when we lived in Lebanon, but this particular one he started wearing here in California. So this is Polo by Ralph Lauren. It was launched in 1978. It's considered a Chypre fragrance. It's created by Carlos Benaim, as I said. And Carlos Benaim is still creating fragrances today, so he's still around. So I guess he was pretty young when he created this one. So this has notes of pine needles, tobacco, leather, oak moss, patchouli, cedar, juniper, vetiver, Chamomile, Artemisia. And when I say Chypre, it's referring to the island of Cypress. And if you don't know anything about Chypre fragrances, I do have several videos that I've done recently on this particular topic. This is definitely a masculine Chypre, and for me, when I smell the fragrance out of the bottle, it just reminds me of a green pine forest. That's what I like about it. It does take me back. It does really remind me of very masculine, classy fragrances of, you know, the 70s, 80s, and maybe perhaps a little bit of the 90s as well. But this is a very iconic bottle. Every time I see it, I'll remember that bottle that was sitting on my parents' bedroom where all their fragrances were. It just always takes me back. The sad thing about this one, though, unfortunately the reformulation is not as good as what I remember the fragrance smelling, but when you first spray it, it takes me back. It smells great, but unfortunately it settles down to a very synthetic smelling leather. Anyway, this is Polo by Ralph Lauren. I love having this bottle around just to remember my dad. Next one at number 4 is a fragrance that is from a house that the house itself doesn't is not around anymore. It's Halston, and Halston, I guess the fragrances are still around because I bought this not too long ago, although I bought it pretty much at the beginning of my YouTube journey, early 2010s, but I still see their fragrances selling, and this particular one sells at places like TJ Maxx, Marshalls, Ross for about $10, $15. This is Halston Z14, launched in 1974, and my dad wore this one around 1980, 81, 82. I don't remember him wearing this one when we lived in Lebanon, but definitely here. In fact, my uncle wore this as well, and I absolutely love this bottle. It was very visual because the first time I saw it was with my uncle, but then my mom bought a bottle for my father as well, and I just kept remember smelling it and, you know, stealing sprays from him. But what's this one all about? This is a woody leather fragrance created by Vincent, Marcelle, and Max Gavarry, and this one has notes of cinnamon, cypress, leather, lemon, oak moss, bergamot, vetiver, patchouli, green notes, coriander, benzoin. So it's a very spicy, woody leather fragrance, and if you've ever gotten gotten your nose on Tom Ford Private Blend Italian Cypress, it smells like this. But that particular one, I think currently, if you can still find it, it was a much more luxury version of this, because I think the way this has reformulated it, it doesn't smell as great as what the Tom Ford smells today, but definitely this one's at number 4 because I can really tolerate the way this smells even in the dry down. It smells great today. It totally takes me back to the days when my dad wore it. I feel like this one has a little more class and sophistication about it, whereas the Polo is a little more rugged and more outdoorsy. This one is more classy and evening. I just visualize that. And I also visualize the disco era with this one, since it was launched in the 70s, and also Halston was involved in that whole Studio 54 thing. I can totally see guys wearing this when they were going to the club. Anyway, this is Z14 from Halston. It's still a great fragrance. Check it out if you want to live those classics from the 80s and 70s. So at number 3, this is Aramis. Aramis. So Aramis was recently featured in a video I did of classic Aramis fragrances for men, and in that video I mentioned that this particular Aramis by Aramis was under the Estee Lauder umbrella of companies, and all the Aramis fragrances were made for men at the time, and a lot of them were made as men's versions of already existing Estee Lauder women's fragrances. If you haven't caught that video, do catch that one. But this one is one that my dad wore, and I was obsessed with it. In fact, he had not only this particular original Aramis from 1966, but he had almost every single other one, including Devon, Tuscany Por Uomo, JHL, and a few others. And I was really obsessed with all those bottles and just always going and smelling them, which I always do anyway. And you know, maybe squeezing a couple of sprays here and there and not telling anyone, but then, you know, my parents would smell that I was already spraying fragrances. But this is launched in 1966. It's a woody Chypre fragrance. Here we go with the Chypre fragrance again. It's created by Bernard Chant, and Bernard Chant was creating fragrances for Estee Lauder and Aramis. I guess he worked within that whole Estee Lauder umbrella of companies and creating a lot of different fragrances. He's done a lot of different fragrances, including Aramis 900 and Clinique Aromatics Elixir, many more. But I love this one because this is also very leathery, and it's also very woody, but there's something classy and sophisticated about this one, which is more dressy, whereas the Halston I visualize more of a nighttime going out, and then the Polo I visualize as more rugged outdoorsy. This one I feel like it's a daytime classy, dressy. You can take it to the office and things like that. So it's that kind of a fragrance. It's bold, it's big, it's masculine, and it totally takes me back. It reminds me of my dad and how he appreciated smelling great all the time. He would wear the fragrances and he would pile it on. He was one of those kind of guys that he would wear all the fragrances, not only to a few sprays, but double that or triple that, and just always smelled great. But this totally reminds me of him. When I think of Aramis, especially the original Aramis here, it takes me back and reminds me of my dad, and it's great to have this bottle in my collection again just to remember him by. So the last 3 fragrances that I was speaking about were fragrances that my dad wore here in the USA after we moved from Lebanon. But going back to the 70s, when I was born in 70, and when he was wearing fragrances, at number 2 is the one that I totally remember him wearing and really loving. He had a bottle in our big bathroom where we lived, and I loved the lavender in here. It smelled great. It wasn't necessarily a barbershop or fougere, but it was kind of like sweet and herbal and aromatic, a little musky, and just really left a major impression on me. This fragrance was launched in 1934, and it's been around since then. It's almost 100 years old, and it still smells great today, and the reformulations have made it, you know, kept it smelling great. I'm speaking about Caron, Pour un Homme de Caron from 1934. This is an aromatic fragrance, and it's created by Ernest Daltroff. So this has notes of lavender, vanilla, and musk, and that's basically it. So it's slightly aromatic, slightly sweet, musky, and it's very unisex. It's totally unisex. I know so many women that wear this fragrance and they love it. And for me, lavender is very comforting, very relaxing, very cozy. This is the kind of fragrance you would have near your bed at night, if you want a little something, spray it on and it'll just like make you sleep very nicely. But this one totally takes me back and reminds me of my dad. Reminds me of the 70s, as I said, with bell bottoms and things like that. You know, it just totally takes me back to that era. Even though the fragrance is from the 30s, this smell just takes me back, and I'm glad to have this bottle. I've had my bottle of Caron Pour Homme, the Caron, for a while. This is actually my second bottle, the first one I bought early on in my YouTube journey, and I'm glad to have it. It just smells great. It's a wonderful fragrance. Again, it's not necessarily ultra masculine, but if you like lavender, you've got to get your nose on Caron Pour Homme, the Caron from 1934. That is at number 2. And the way I'm ranking the fragrances here is I put the least great smelling fragrance at the bottom and the best smelling fragrance at the number 1. So the number 1 spot is another fragrance that was launched in 1966, just like the Aramis. I feel like is my favorite of the ones that my dad wore, but also it's my favorite of the ones that smell. Like the reformulations have kept it smelling great, and also this number 1 is also one of the most modern out of all of them. I'm speaking about Dior Eau Sauvage, a wonderful fragrance created in 1966 by Edmond Rudnitska. This is considered a citrus aromatic fragrance and a class act all the way. And this actually also is perfect for Father's Day. Like, this is a total Father's Day fragrance. It's fresh, it's refreshing, it's citric, it's got a little vetiver in there, it's got loads of aromatic notes in there like herbs and things like that. And to this day it smells great. Although I feel like it's been reformulated to attract more modern wearers of this fragrance, because I feel like it smells a little different than what I remember my dad wearing. Even the bottle's different, but it smells fantastic. And I feel like out of all of these, number 2 and number 1, more number 1 than number 2, but both number 2 and number 1 are ones that would attract current and modern noses as much more than the previous ones, because the previous ones are a little more classic. But if you have an advanced palate and you appreciate the classics, you can definitely try all of these fragrances. But this one does not disappoint, and it's a great Father's Day fragrance, and it totally takes me back and reminds me of my dad wearing it in the 70s when I was a little kid. Anyway, this is a Dior Eau Sauvage. This will never go out of style for me. It smells fantastic, and that's at number 1. There you have it. Those are my top 5 fragrances my dad wore. Great fragrances, classic fragrances, awesome men's fragrances. Let me know if you know these fragrances, if you've worn them yourself, and which fragrances your dad wore. Give me your top 5 if you remember what fragrances your dad wore. Put a comment down so I can find out. Also, if you'd like to visit Saffler Bon, there's a link in the info box for Saffler Bon. You can go there and check out some of their more recent posts and participate in some of their giveaways. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching today. If you are a dad, happy Father's Day, or if you are going to be with your dad, happy Father's Day to your dad. Please do like this video, please share it, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye.